Welcome to Spirited Straight Talk, the podcast to help you thrive with the help of spirit. I'm Deb Shepard, psychic medium, spiritual teacher, and author. Each week, I bring new insights to help you heal from loss, connect with spirit, and turn setbacks into triumphs. So let's get started.
Hey everyone, we're excited to continue our countdown of the 3 most popular episodes of Spirited Straight Talk so far. The second most popular was my story, or the podcast is named Dana's Story. After this episode, we received so many emails from listeners sharing their own experience and feeling that the fact that I could share my story and the difficulty that I faced and the challenges that I faced as a young child helped them really recognize their own story and readdress it. One listener even said, I deeply care about and it's been extremely difficult for me to address it out loud again, but hearing your story reaffirms my strength and journey to forgiving myself each and every single day. And a lot of what I share in here is very difficult to hear, difficult for me to say, but it's me at my most vulnerable in hopes that reaching you with my story will help empower you in some way.
I want to welcome everyone back to part 2 of the story about your journey, Dana, and what you've been through. And so far we're getting so many people that have listened to it, and we have a lot more to share. And also we want to talk about the healing process you've been to, because we want to give everyone hope and understanding that this is not who you are. This is what you've experienced, but you've really worked hard to kind of change a lot of things in your life, which is pretty amazing. And in the last podcast, we left off with your brother, half-brother.
I was probably maybe around 12 or 13 at that point, I think. Somewhere in that range. There were a few things that happened over the course of a couple of years after that were very impactful, and I think began my journey towards finally getting away.
Survival.
Yeah, it was survival. One of the stories I want to talk about is because for a long time, I believed that some of this was happening due to drugs in the home. And I was one of those kids that I was exposed to drugs from a very, very young age. I remember, even at the age of 4 and 5, seeing a bong and seeing these drugs being surrounded.
It was not legal then.
It was not legal, but
and you were a child.
I was a child, and I remember being passed a bong one time as a very young child. Not long after I was moved into my father and stepmother's home, and I remember all their friends, surrounded by all their friends, they were all connected to these drugs.
You even mentioned cocaine and other types of drugs other than just marijuana.
Right. I'm not sure of the extent of it, but I do know for sure that I saw a lot of marijuana, and I did see cocaine, and I know that I have at least one family member that was connected to heroin. So I know there was a lot of different things that took place, but in my young mind, I thought, these drugs are a part of it. And I ended up, they were kind of commonplace. I had no concept of value or anything. And I do know that at one point there were drugs or marijuana plants being grown in a greenhouse behind the house.
In the backyard.
In the backyard, yeah. And this was 35 years ago, so this was way before it was legal. But I took some of my father's weed and traded it for money.
For money.
I traded it for money to buy food. And I would sneak down to the store that was across from the school. And, on a 10-minute break, I would run as fast as my legs could carry me across the street and then run all the way back to gym class, actually. And
to have food.
So I would buy like just small things that I could hide to have food, because I never knew when I was going to be fed in that house, or if I was going to be fed, especially during the summertime. School, I knew I could count on school lunch. And other than that, I had no guarantees.
You at least one meal a day during school, but not anything else that would guarantee you
that I would be,
fed.
that I would be taken care of. Yeah. So I was caught, of course. They recognized that their drugs were missing, because I'm sure they had counted and knew exactly. Of course they would have. But in my mind, as young as I was, I didn't, I don't think I had the concept, or I didn't care maybe at the time. But
or both.
Right. I was caught, and I remember just thinking they were going to murder me. And I really thought that was going to happen. And they didn't, although I think I remember getting kicked with steel-toed boots, because it happened right after my father came home from work. I had to pay back their drug money. So I was told, you're going to find some way to pay us back.
Weren't you like 11?
I was 11.
11.
And I remember I said, I basically said, then I'll get a paper route or something to pay the money back. And so I got a paper route, and it was probably maybe 70 pounds, but I would carry the big, huge, I would walk the paper route, and I would carry this humongous front and back. It was like a backpack thing, but it had a front and a back to it.
And you were probably
filled with papers.
60 pounds.
Yeah, I was pretty tiny. But I worked to pay back the money for their drugs. And then after it was paid back, I was made to continue to work to give them money. My stepmother told me that I was going to continue to work, and that they were going to take the money from this paper route. So I did I don't know for how long, but for quite some time after that. And I think the only reason that I didn't continue the paper route is because I ran away at a certain point. I started running away, trying to get away, and sharing my story with authorities. So I had that paper route for quite some time.
Before we go any further, I want to talk about, you had a dog in this family too that was tied up in the backyard.
Yeah.
But
Muffy was tied up in the backyard.
But you said that the dog was fed more often than you, but eventually they starved it.
I found out later that, and this is heartbreaking, they never treated their animals well. They had 2 animals at one point. I can't remember what happened to one of them. She was a tiny dog named Daisy Mae. Muffy was always chained with a big chain in the backyard. He was a black, fluffy dog.
Chow.
And a chow. He was a chow. And they never treated the dog well. He was kept outside, never brought inside. The only times I remember him being brought inside, maybe it was like a really, really bad storm or something. But the only time I remember him being brought in or being in the house, I remember my father taking a belt and beating the dog.
Like he did you.
Like he did me, yeah. And the poor dog was just crying. And he had grabbed him by the hair and he was just awful to him.
So not only is this happening to you, but now you're visualizing him doing this with an innocent animal that is also a victim.
Right. And I found out years later from my sister that the dog starved to death. He was always kept outside, that the poor thing just wasted away and died. And they didn't even realize he was dying. Like they just didn't feed him. And I heard it was one of the children's responsibility to feed him, but they just completely ignored this dog. And he just eventually died. And it just breaks my heart. I wish I would have gone to take the freaking dog.
Yeah.
That is...
You probably wanted to stay far away as possible at the same time.
Yeah, I mean...
So some of the things that we've talked about that you shared, which I know one of the stories that I probably will share, that you had a couple teachers that treated you
Very cruelly.
Very cruelly. And one of them brought tears to my eyes. And I know that there's times I bring you cupcakes just in those memories, but do you want to share a few of those episodes?
Yeah, I had a couple of teachers. I was still in grade school. And of course I was very different. My clothes were horrible.
Kids bullied you.
I was bullied all the time, but you knew I was different. I had shoes that were taped together with duct tape. I tried to hide the duct tape inside the shoe to tape it together, to not have it be visible. But
It was,
yeah. My clothes were falling apart. My shoes were falling apart. And none of that was taken care of ever. If I had clothes or if I got clothes, they were secondhand, which was fine. But I would wear them until they were worn out.
there's nothing left.
Yeah. And there was a couple of teachers. One of them was Mrs. Bieber. And she was just mean. She was a mean soul. Like if I ever said anything in class, she would jump right on me and shut me up.
And you were a smart kid.
Well, I wasn't stupid,
No,
but
smart.
I was very clearly in an abusive situation. And not only did they not really care or ever try to help, and I don't know how much they could have done, but they could at least be kind.
Yeah, be kind.
And
Show compassion.
yeah, and a couple of grades later, I was probably in 5th grade, maybe 6th. There was another one that made a huge impact on me was Mrs. Watkins. And I remember being excluded from the class several times. And in this one particular instance, there was a birthday party going on. And so one of my classmates had cupcakes for their birthday. And she put me outside in the hallway and wouldn't allow me to participate in this birthday. And not only was I being starved, but a chance to have something, a treat or food of some kind was taken away by a teacher that wanted to be cruel.
I remember the first time you told me the story, I mean, still to this day, I want to weep. But I remember buying you cupcakes.
Yeah, you
Just so to,
say, I can have cupcakes.
you have cupcakes. But it also just broke my heart that a teacher would do this.
Yeah. And the only reason, like we said, the only reason I share these stories, this I think is impactful in the way that people have to know there are kids out there that this is still happening to. And every time I see a story pop up, every time I see that another kid has died from this type of abuse, I'm like, why? I think right away, why have we not progressed?
Right.
We haven't gotten anywhere since I was a child.
And
this
healing. It's important to have the healing if you've been through it.
And how do you do it?
How do you do it? Because so many people that have had these things, experiences, it's shameful, they're blamed, they don't feel like they're deserving, they don't have a value. I think they end up with really horrible relationships, ones that continue to be mean to them. And it's getting out of that cycle that you were told.
I think things started to shift for me in my mind. I think it was I was a freshman in high school, or right around that area, maybe a little before, but for sure that year, I started running away. I would climb out of the window of the basement. I would take the screen out and climb out of the window of the basement. And for one reason or another, I just was pushed to that point, whether it was an impending beating that I knew was coming, or it was, I can't take this anymore. I'm in this basement by myself in this room 24/7. It was usually in the summertime when it got really bad.
Well, then also you were tied up by your stepmom.
Yeah, there was one time I remember that I can't remember if I probably took food. It was probably a food thing because that's really what it was focused on, my trying to survive. And I somehow got caught. I always got caught, but was one of those.
Yes.
And so I remember her taking rope or cord of some kind and tying my hands behind my back and then tying that to a door knob. And I was made to stand there all day. I was a criminal, basically. And I heard my sister asking her why, very nicely asking her, "Mom, why do you have to tie Dana up?" And I heard her answer, "Because she's bad and she has to know what it's like when you're a criminal. And this is what it's going to be like for her." And so, there were multiple little things like that.
Constant.
It was a constant barrage of being beaten physically, beaten down emotionally,
Hit in the head.
being made to feel like you were less than a dog. Yeah. And, but then again, we know how they treated the dog. So,
yes, yeah. But then you decided at one moment or several moments that you were going to leave.
I kept trying to get away, and I kept being put back in the home. So I had a social worker, and my aunt reminded me today of that social worker's name. It's kind of funny. Who knows if she's even still around? I'm sure, who knows. Her name was Paula Comfort.
Of all names. And
she at some point got involved, and I don't remember all the timelines, but she at some point got involved, and I remember the first time I ran away, I was picked up by the cops, and I remember sitting down and talking to a quote unquote friend who would help me, and I kept asking different people, "Will you help me? Will you help me?" And this friend allowed me to come to their home, and I talked to this friend's mom, who happened to work in a school. And of course, the next day, I went to school because I had nowhere else to go. And the cops picked me up and took me, because I was reported as a runaway. So they took me to a halfway house. In a halfway house, this particular halfway house had troubled kids in the top part and had criminals coming out of jail in the bottom of this halfway house.
Mixed with these kids.
Mixed with these mainly young girls. Yeah, I was with, maybe there was two sides. Maybe there was boys on one side and girls on the other, or what have you. I don't remember much about the boys, but I remember there being like 4 or 5 girls and these criminals in the basement of this halfway house. The authorities recommended a 30-day timeout program at this halfway house. And so I was put into that. And, I had food. I had a bed that was a comfortable bed. I had, attention from people, counseling. And I did share a few things that was going on. And one of them was the lock on the door. And so throughout this halfway house experience, one of the things that towards the end of it, one of the things that we had to do was write down what an ideal night with my family would be. And my ideal night was to have popcorn and watch Karate Kid with the rest of the family, like they would do every night. They would watch movies and all that stuff. And that was my ideal night. And so
very little that you asked.
Yeah, so I think it was a weekend stay. So I went back home for the weekend, and that was to take place. And I can't remember what happened, but I was punished for something, and I think I was smacked and got a bloody nose. And so when I went back to the halfway house, they asked how it went, and I told them. I was then called a liar by my stepmother, but this actually did happen. I was called a liar, and they pulled me out of the 30-day program and made me come home. And so it was like, no matter what I said, no matter how much I told people, I was never taken seriously. They didn't listen. They didn't help me change my circumstances. They kept letting them take me back and put me back into this situation. I don't know how she did it, but she manipulated every single person she was ever in contact with throughout this whole situation. I was home for a short time, and then I remember her and my father getting into a fight of some sort, and she kicked him out. So he stuck me in a foster home. And this was all within the same time period. So had counseling there, talked to people there, social services again. It's a recurring theme.
Basically, you're telling your story to the wall.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing done other than, we we hear what you're saying, but we're not going to actively do anything for you.
Somehow they would convince social services, the counselors, that I was a troubled child, that this was me, that I was troubled and lying about all this stuff. Well, social services showed up at the door after I was sent home and made them, or asked to see if the lock was removed from my door. And it was at that point, but at the door, they were stopped from coming in.
So they never got to have an actual view of the room.
No, she started cussing and, leave us the fuck alone and all this stuff. And social services ended up walking away without confirming anything. And I could hear all this going on, and I just felt so alone and isolated, and I had no hope. There was no hope at that point. I'm like, I'm not going to get away. I'm not going to get away. I'm going to be murdered.
Here.
I will be murdered by my father or my stepmother. I had no doubt that had I stayed there any longer, my father would probably have killed me, because the beatings that I was withstanding, if I made a sound or cried, he would cover my nose and mouth. And he would cover my nose and mouth to the point where I would almost pass out. So he would hold my nose and mouth as he was beating me so that I couldn't make a sound, so people couldn't hear me screaming. And so I learned to try to not make any noise so that he wouldn't cut off my breathing. And this is during beatings. I learned to not cry, which is probably why I still have problems today with my emotions, and pain does not make me cry. Mm-hmm. Happiness makes me cry.
Right.
Pain does not make me cry. Emotional or physical pain doesn't. I don't cry from it.
I've heard these stories a few times, and even when I'm hearing them now as we're recording this to share, my heart is just hurting, and not for anything other than no one took an opportunity to be there during this time. Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me take a
Deep
breath. Yeah.
Deep breath. It does. I mean, we do. There were lots of other things that happened. I think a lot of it was emotional abuse as well. I literally wasn't it, or I was a she. I didn't have a name. I didn't have birthdays. I didn't celebrate holidays. I didn't get gifts. I didn't get to visit family.
You were locked outside during the summer.
I was locked outside during the summer to be made to pull weeds. Or whatever other chore to earn my meals, if they were done right, if they were done good enough, whatever chores she could come up with to not only make me do things to help with the family, which is fine, but it was more to make me do things as a way to control me and to control meals, right, and to control what I could and couldn't do. So she created these things. It was always a creation of a thing to make me try to chase if I could have a meal that evening.
Okay. But then you decide.
You ready?
Yes.
Are you ready to go to the other side?
I'm ready to go to the other side. So,
yeah.
What eventually got you to...
What happened was, it was during the summer, and my siblings were playing some sort of game in the basement outside of my room. So the basement in that house, there were two bedrooms. There was like the drug room, I'll call it the drug room, but basically my father had his stuff in there, some sort of workspace. And then there was like a little seating area with a TV and a couch and stuff. So they were in the TV couch area playing some sort of game, and the lock wasn't on my door, and I was allowed to go to the restroom and back to my room. So I stepped out to go to the restroom.
And how old were you here?
I was 14, for sure I was 14. Okay. I was almost 15 at that point. So this had been going on from the age of 8, and I'm now 14. Almost turning 15. And so I walked to the restroom, I walked back to my room. And on my way back to my room, I paused for a second and I asked my siblings what they were playing. And I believe my sister answered me, but my stepmother had snuck down the stairs and she heard my sister answer me and answer the question. And she came around the corner and she saw me standing in front of the doorway to my room, as opposed to, I was not allowed to speak to them. I wasn't allowed to speak to her children. Those were her children. I wasn't it. I wasn't allowed to speak to them. And so I had to go back in the room without, I should have, but I didn't. I paused and I spoke to them. And my sister answered and she caught us. And so she came over, I believe, and shoved me in my room and said, "Wait till your father gets home." And she proceeded to take the belt and beat every one of her children so that I could hear it. So she started with the smallest upstairs. She beat her with the belt. I could hear her crying. She was right above me. Then she came downstairs and she beat the other two with the belt. And they were crying. And so she didn't touch me, though. She was going to save that for later. And I knew what that meant. She knew what that meant. That meant that he was going to get home, and I was really going to be in for it. And I was scared out of my mind all day. So I sat there, for a couple hours, and thought about this, because it was probably maybe late morning. I contemplated hanging myself. I started thinking, I can't do this again. I can't go through this again. So I had it all planned out. I was going to hang myself. And as I sat there and started thinking about this, and I started thinking about my grandmother and my grandfather, who were such a positive influence in my life when I was a little girl. And I had them for 4 years. And I think without the memory of them and without the memory of the love that they gave me, I don't think I would have survived as long as I did.
I believe that.
So as I'm contemplating suicide, I started thinking about them and said, no, I'm not going to do it. I am leaving. I have to get away. I have to figure out how to get away and how to find them. And so I climbed out of the window one last time. I crawled out. But before I did, I wrote a note. I wrote a long letter. And I told them how this time I was not coming back. And I apologized to my brothers and sisters, each one. I said, I'm really sorry that I got you in trouble. I'm really sorry that you had to go through getting beaten by your mom, because I made the mistake of talking to you, so I apologized to them. And then I told my stepmother and father how I was done, that I wasn't going to be there for them to beat me anymore, that I wasn't going to be there for them to call me names anymore or treat me like they treated me, or, I listed it all out for them to read.
Wow.
Like, I'm not going to be here for you to do this and this and this and this.
You took your power.
I listed it out, and I climbed out of that window and I started running down the street. And as I'm, I didn't have this all planned out, but as I'm running down the street, I'm like, who can I get to help me? Where can I go?
After you've been disappointed so many times.
I knew the cops weren't going to help me. Because I tried that. I knew teachers weren't going to help me. I knew social services wasn't going to help me. So how can I get somebody to believe me and help me? So I wasn't going back. So either I was going to live on the streets and just be homeless and live on the streets, or I was going to somehow find my grandparents. And I really didn't know where anybody lived. I didn't have contact information. I just wasn't aware of things because I was so isolated. I wasn't aware of lots of things in the world. I was very, in a way, some things were good, that I was as innocent as I was, but I just was not aware of anything. And so I ran to a girl's house that I went to school with, which ironically, her big brother was the next door neighbor of my stepmother and father.
Wow.
So that's kind of a bizarre twist, but so they kind of all knew what
was going on,
but they didn't get involved. And I ran to this girl's house, and I didn't have friends. I was very bullied through school. Kids would make plans on how they could beat me up after school. And it happened many a time. So I was one of those kids. I was very bullied. And this girl, though, was kind. And her family, her mom was Hispanic and her dad was Japanese. And they were just the cutest little couple. They were always so sweet. And I think it was the Hispanic thing that drew me. But they helped me. I was there for a week. And they're trying to figure out, and I'm telling, the mom these things, and this girl, I'm telling her some of the things, maybe that were going on, and they decided to help me through this.
Finally.
And what ended up happening, I was there for about a week, and then they had one of the older brothers, his girlfriend, fiance, had some bad situations when she was young. So they came and got me, and they took me to another house. And it took a couple days to get me to do this. They were so kind. I mean, here I am, this weird little kid, completely screwed up. And they had me finally convinced me to call social services. And I called, and they were trying to convince me, social services was trying to convince me to go in. And I said, I am not going in. I am not going back. I'm not going in to see anyone. So after back and forth with this social services worker, they finally said, well, your grandparents are looking for you. And they gave me the phone number. And I called. And within a half hour,
oh wow,
my aunt and uncle and my grandparents were there to get me. And I remember my grandmother crying and just thanking this family for helping me finally and
escape,
for helping me get away. Yeah. And my grandmother, they were terrified, because I guess what happened is they found out that I had run away because my father and stepmother called them to see if I was there. Yeah. And I wasn't. And so then they started looking for me, and they posted a note on their house that they used to live in to call them. And they weren't living there at the time. It was vacant, but they started looking for me. And so I think it took a couple days for them to let everybody know that they had me. And during that time, things are a little bit fuzzy, because I was always in such fear that they were going to force me to go back, or somehow I was going to be made to go back. And I know that my entire family that was surrounding me was working really hard to not have let me go back, but they didn't know what to do. And so my aunt, who is also my godmother,
and we love her.
Yes. Yes, very much. We've had a journey too, but my aunt decided to figure out how to make this work. And she was, in my opinion, she was a genius, because these two people did not want me to be away from their torturous household. And so however she did it,
it's a miracle.
Yeah. And I know some of the stories, but I will say that I lived in fear for years, because I really thought anytime at any moment. Mm-hmm. And so I know that there was a time period I went through nightmares and night sweats, and I'm sure, I still have PTSD. Like right now, I can feel my insides quaking, mm-hmm. like shaking. Mm-hmm. And it just happens. When you go to that place where you remember some of these things, it just happens. It's like a flight or fight mm-hmm. response.
Absolutely.
That I have. And I think created, probably, I have fibromyalgia. I know I have that. I know I have, my joints are bad. My teeth are bad. So I think the malnutrition affected my body, and it's affected emotionally. There's a lot that it was affected. But then the healing began. That's like
The whole reason why we're telling the story is because there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is a healing, and but there's a lot in between that you also went through that still some objections to things and challenges that you've been through, and partners that were not very kind. So those things continued. I think what's important is to understand how you were able to basically push yourself through all of that and not continue to be that victim. And I don't think you were ever a victim, but that's how they made you feel. But from the stories you shared with me, I mean, you just took off like a rocket.
Well, I think, and I have to give, I mean, I know it could not have been easy for my aunt and uncle taking me in. And I have to give them a ton of credit because I know there were times that was probably pretty difficult. But I was also one of those kids, I didn't get into a lot of trouble. I didn't like go out and create trouble. You know, I was very innocent in that way. So, I probably had the teenage attitude coming out and all that stuff. And I know it couldn't have been easy, but my aunt and uncle were very good influences on me too, and allowed me to find myself, allowed me a couple of years, to wrap my head around. Get my grounding, yeah. And unfortunately, at about 18, they started going through some personal things, and I had to find my own way from there. In a way, that was probably a good thing because it really made me figure out a way to excel and not to go into a negative spiral. And I know a lot of people in my situation, they do go on that negative spiral no matter what, but that was not, I put my mind to it that was not the direction I was going to go. I'd seen other people go there in my family, had visually seen them go to those bad places. And I just,
You decided.
I decided it was not the direction I was going to go. And I had to find a job quickly because I had to support myself very quickly. I finished high school. I had a Pell Grant to go to school out in California, and I was too scared to go because I didn't have guidance. So I ended up staying here. I just got a job and started supporting myself. Ended up in a situation where I was managing people. By the time I was like 19 or 20, I was managing a crew of people, and it was in retail at the time. So it was probably more just abuse. Retail.
Whole nother story there.
But so I started managing people and started learning a lot of things about that world of
you grew up
managing. And I grew up very quickly from there and had some good friends along the way. One of my good friends I'm still friends with, even though she lives in Seattle. Still very good friends with her, and she helped me get through a lot. But what ends up happening, I think, for a lot of people when they're in situations like I was in, they try to find love, and they don't know where they're looking for love or how to get it. So I picked all the wrong partners. Over and over again, the same. It was like Groundhog Day. The same,
which is
horrible, crappy partners every time. But one of the things that happened, I was 21 when I got pregnant with my son. And I think that, so I was still very young.
Yes.
I think having my son put me in a place of understanding unconditional love for the first time. Having him was like a godsend. It grounded me immediately. I stopped destructive behavior with relationships. It was always with relationships. I was never like drinking or into drugs or it was always relationship crap. And so having him really helped ground me. And, when you have this innocent little guy looking at you and depending on you for everything, you really change how you function.
Well, at least you did.
At least I did, yeah.
Right.
I mean, that was my way of thinking is I didn't want children to begin with because I was scared that repeating patterns, even though I know I'm not the way they were. But also you just get scared of that. And I don't want to, I didn't know if I could raise a child. But when he came into this world, my world changed. Mm-hmm. And that was the first time I experienced unconditional love. And his biological
donor
wasn't involved in his life, and that's okay.
It is okay.
That's
Even
okay.
Though he was mean to you too.
He was, yeah. But it was that same pattern. When I found out I was pregnant, he threw water in my face and told me I was trying to trap him. So my response was, I'm going to raise my child on my own, and goodbye.
And you did.
Thanks. And I did. Yeah, I did. Then the next relationship, the same pattern. And then when Thomas was about 10, I was in another relationship that ended up being emotionally abusive.
Used your childhood against you.
Used my childhood against me in a way that was very hurtful. And I couldn't talk about it. I couldn't talk about my childhood because every conversation had to be about this narcissistic person. So my experience could never be talked about unless it was thrown at me in a hurtful way. So through all these experiences, I learned not to talk about it. Even with family, I didn't really talk about it very much. The couple of times I brought some things up, I was told, well, you're okay, though. Look at you. You're doing just fine.
You're successful.
So, why bring it up? And it's like, well, I haven't dealt with it. I've never dealt with it. I've never actually talked about these things, and just in my head. And so right around the time I met you, I had met with a psychotherapist that was going to start doing because I was really struggling. I was starting to struggle more and more. And I was in a situation where I owned a business and I had a team of, like at one time it was like 25 people. But I think at the time I had downsized it a little bit and it was maybe more closer to 20 or 19 or whatever. And I was struggling. I could not hold it all together anymore. And the relationship thing was really, really bad. And I had wanted to be out for years, but couldn't figure out a way to get out of this. And then there was a situation that happened about a year before I met you that really spun things out of control. And I had just started a new job. I couldn't just leave.
And you had an investment of a home and everything else.
A home, yeah. And the other party wasn't in agreement with getting rid of the home. And I was in a place where I really wanted to just run away and disappear.
Out the window again.
Mm-hmm. I really wanted to just run away, yeah. And there were some things that happened with my son that, I may never forgive myself for, but I try, and I try to be there for him every day. I saw the psychotherapist, and the inner child work just did not resonate with me. It just was not something that I didn't want to go back to pretending I was that child to feel all those feelings again.
And be powerless.
And I tried. I was just like, I can't be that. I can't go there and comfort that child. I have to be me and figure out a way to connect all the dots and have this make sense for me. And so I think that's when we started talking, and I had a session with you, and then I started mentoring, and I started, and I'd always believed in reincarnation, the possibility of things other than what we've always been taught anyway. But when we started going through our soul contracts and how even in my Vedic astrology chart, it shows, and through soul contracts, the understanding that we create these situations prior to our birth. And it's, even though all these things happen to me, and I'm not happy that they happen to me, and free will is involved in a lot of this too, I still chose those parents, and I really did choose to have a very challenging life. And I believe that 100%.
But it was able for you to put your head around, then how do we heal?
Right.
How do you heal these circumstances, and what did you go through? And you learned about the archetypes and the lessons and the teachers and the soul group, and that, so that you had words for it and explanations for it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think there are certain things I will always struggle with. I will always have PTSD from this. So I may react differently to certain things than other people. I'm not as emotional as other people outwardly, but you get to see my emotions all the time, of course, because I trust you, but outwardly I'm not that emotional. I can cut people off like that.
Right.
And, if I'm not emotionally invested with somebody, and they cross my boundaries, I will never speak to them again, and I'm just fine with that.
Right.
I have no guilt. But if it's somebody that I'm emotionally invested with, I will be loyal to a fault. So there's that balance. Like, if I love you, I never, I want to do everything I can to.
And you do.
Well, I'm just saying.
I know,
I'm just saying like that. Yeah. I know that there's some issues with that too. So I think it's something that I constantly work through, but it can be done, and I refuse to let what they did to me define me, and I will never let it define me.
Aren't you proud of yourself that you have come to that understanding that that's not you, that they didn't take away your spirit?
They almost did.
Oh, yes.
And when I talk about it, I can feel those same feelings that I felt back then.
Yeah. Just so you guys know, this has not been an easy
conversation
for both of us.
No.
It takes us a lot to get up here and go, okay, let's tell the story.
Yeah.
So, I'm very proud, because this is being very vulnerable and transparent and sharing this, and it's taking a lot of energy for you to share even the pieces you have shared, and there's so much more, as you and I know. What's your best advice for everybody?
My best advice: if you see something, say something. And I didn't realize this when we put this together and decided it's time to just share a little bit about this. But April is Child Abuse Awareness Month, and I didn't know that. And so this was kind of divine timing. But, one of the biggest things in my situation was I asked for help and asked for help and asked for help. And what we see in a lot of these situations, when I read about them with other kids, they keep asking for help and it doesn't come. So finally, the inevitable happens. And I know that would have happened to me had I been there longer, because situations, it just got to be really bad. If you're a teacher, or you're
a neighbor,
or you're a family member, many family members of mine saw what was going on and did nothing. Many friends of the family that were connected to the family knew something was very wrong. They could see it. And they would even ask questions of my father and stepmother, and they never did anything. They never did anything. Somebody mentioned to me that saw what was going on, that, he handed me a candy bar one time. Like, I didn't need a freaking candy bar. I needed help.
Right.
I needed help to not be in that situation, to live a normal life and not have the consequences of being an abused child later in life. But it is what it is. So all I can say now is be an advocate. And I plan at some point, and I know you will feel me on this, is at some point being involved somehow with helping kids that have been in those situations. Yeah. Or talking to them, at least talking to kids, talking to schools maybe, to bring these things to light, that you can stand up for yourself. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times these kids are abused consistently because they don't stand up for themselves. And I didn't stand up for myself when I was a child because I knew it would make it worse.
Yes. Okay, and my heart is a little sad, but proud. And I'm grateful that you shared this story with all these people that follow us. And please share with us your stories or insights. But I think our next podcast is our view on forgiveness. Because people expect you just to forgive. And that's not what we believe. So join us on the next podcast.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope it inspired you. If you enjoyed our conversation, make sure you subscribe so that you get notified of new episodes. And let's get connected. Visit debshepard.com for more insights, support, workshops, and a book a session with me. And finally, always remember, your loved ones in spirit are just a thought away. Even though they're on the other side, they're always by your side.